What's going on, YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey. It's Kevin Forte, and today we are going back into the Western Conference as we look at our 32 teams here going into the season. And today we're heading out west to the Vancouver Canucks. Interesting talk about the Canucks this year. There are some people saying they're a playoff team, some people saying they're not a playoff team. So this could be a pretty controversial one because I think that the Canucks, with what they did last season, going into this year, can some of the young guys pop off? How's the goaltending health going to be? Those are all big questions for the Canucks. So we're going to discuss that today, and if I think they are a playoff team in 2024. All right, so looking at my prediction from last season, I predicted that the Canucks would go to the playoffs, and they disappointed me. This was a team that did not finish toward the top of the standings. They actually, quite honestly, did the opposite. They finished toward the bottom of the NHL standings and missed the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, there were a couple big factors in that, and I think that's something that you have to remember here for the Vancouver Canucks. But losing Thatcher Demko to an injury was huge and was really the nail in the coffin for this team. They've made some interesting changes to this roster. You look at some of the guys that have left the organization. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, bought out by the Canucks. He will no longer be there. Look at some of the guys they brought in. They brought in Pia Suter from the Detroit Red Wings. I think he's a pretty good player, and I think that they are really going to like him there in Vancouver. He's going to be more of a middle six depth center, but nonetheless, he could be a pretty good addition there. The back end really saw the most change. One of the worst defenses in the league last year. Were they able to make the right changes in the right spots and push the right buttons, bringing in guys like Carson Soucy, Ian Cole, Matt Irwin, just to name a few. Looking at some of the guys that could be younger players making the roster for the Canucks, I'm definitely keeping an eye on guys like Vasily Podkolzin and Jonathan Lekkerimaki. Those are the two guys that are former first-round picks for the Canucks. Definitely would have an eye on this season. So, like I said, the defense was a huge issue for the Canucks last year. I don't think anybody expected them to be that bad. We knew they were going to be bad, but not that bad. If they could be any better than they were last season with a healthy Demko, that is going to be a nice little stronghold for this team. We know they can score up front. They've got Brock Besser when healthy. Vasily Podkolzin. We saw guys like Niels Höglander kind of jumping in there, scoring some goals. And now you're talking about guys that could make the roster like Lekkerimaki and Podkolzin. Those are guys that can also help in the scoring department. So the Canucks have a lot of good scoring depth. They have a lot of good forwards. The real question for this team is that defense and goaltending going to be able to help them out. In all honesty, I look at even a guy like Arttu Räty, who they got in the Bo Horvat trade from the Islanders last year. He's a really good prospect, and I think he could be a guy that they're hoping gets in the lineup at some point this year. Also, in between the pipes, I also look at Artur Silovs. He's another guy that now that they've kind of moved on with some of that goaltending veteranship behind Demko, now leaves a spot for Artur Silovs to come in and maybe become the next goalie there in Vancouver. Yes, even with Demko there. So the way I look at this team and the way the roster is kind of laid out, you have Beauvillier, you have Kuzmenko coming back, Mikheyev, and then you look at the bottom six and you've got Dakota Joshua, Phil DiGiuseppe, and I'm like, don't know if I like that too much. Now again, that's where some of the guys that I've mentioned, like Vasily Podkolzin, Arttu Räty, potentially even Jonathan Lekkerimaki, if those guys can make the team out of camp, I think that would be better than the roster they have right now. It's no guarantee that they do, especially Lekkerimaki. It's a little bit of a stretch for him to make it this year. But with guys like Podkolzin coming in, those are the guys they desperately need for help. And down the middle, it is pretty solid. I have to honestly say, I like Pia Suter there on the third line. Teddy Blucher coming in, I think he's a good fourth line player. That's a decent spot for him there. JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, they have their own questions, but we'll see how that goes. I think the biggest weakness for this team up front, honestly, is JT Miller. And the reason I say that is I remember going to an Islanders Canucks game, and I'm sure this happened across other games, and I noticed it for the rest of the season, is JT Miller is the type of player that his body language sucks. He's not a guy that I think you'd want to look at as a leader. And he's one of those guys when things go awry, he's the first one to be like, throw his arms in the air and make it very noticeable with his body language that things are not going well. And that's not really something that's going to be good leadership for your team. And that's something that I noticed last season. I'm sure a lot of Canucks fans criticize as well. As I remember you guys, even in my live streams, watching the Red Wings, I'm like, why is Miller being a baby? He's got to grow out of this at some point, right? And it never really happened. So I'm definitely interested to see how things go there. That would be my one criticism of this team up front. Now, on the back end, that's a little bit of a different story because there was so many things you could nitpick with that defense. The only real positive was Quinn Hughes, and he is returning for the Canucks. Now, Carson Soucy, Ian Cole, Filip Hronek, Christian Wolanin, and Tyler Myers is your projected top six. I think Filip Hronek, I know they took a lot of criticism for that trade last year, but that looks a lot better right now with Hronek in there. Not saying he's this heroic, Norris Trophy winning defenseman, but he's a good shutdown guy, and I think he was actually a little bit underrated there in Detroit. I think that's a good addition for the Canucks, in all honesty. Tyler Myers is Tyler Myers. We know what the situation is there, so he's going to be your third pairing defense. I'm okay with him there, not at that number in terms of his salary, but in terms of his skill level, he's a third line pairing defenseman in the NHL right now. So, the way I look at the Canucks, this team ultimately is going to come down to, can that defense improve slightly, and can Thatcher Demko stay healthy? That's been a big problem for Thatcher Demko. We know what he's capable of. We remember what he did in the playoff bubble, sending this team to the 2020 Western Conference Finals against the Dallas Stars. They were very close to going to the Stanley Cup Final in 2021, or in 2020. It was 2020. They were close. And a lot of that was because of Thatcher Demko. If he can put this team on his back like he did back then, they definitely have a chance to go on a serious run. Not only make the playoffs, but go on a run. But they got to get there first, and I think they still need help defensively. I think there's still some questions about what this team is truly capable of. But if I had to pick a team in the Western Conference, or specifically in the Pacific Division, that might surprise some people, it is the Vancouver Canucks, and I'm going to go with them winning anywhere between 40 to 45 games and potentially getting anywhere between 95 to 100 points. I have a high ceiling on the Canucks. I think that's a little bit drastic, but I think the bottom of this division with teams, honestly, I think Anaheim is still a little bit of a ways out, maybe another year or two away. I think San Jose could definitely be a team that's toward the bottom, if not last in the NHL. And Seattle, I like the Seattle Kraken, but I do have some questions about their geographical rival down there in Seattle. I think Vancouver could have an impressive season this year, anywhere between 95 to 100 points, and making the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2024. But like I said, this all comes down to better defense, and you need Thatcher Demko to stay healthy. And if that's the case, they definitely have a chance for the type of season I predict they will. So guys, let me know what you think down below of the Vancouver Canucks. Do you think this is a playoff team in 2024, or do you think they will miss the playoffs once again and disappoint those fans there in Vancouver? Guys, that's it for today. Make sure to watch the rest of our videos here in our season preview series. We're coming up toward the end here, as we have just a few teams left. We have Vegas, Washington, and Winnipeg. And of course, check out the rest of our playlist at the end of this video. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.